I had a question the other day about whether or not a GoPro was appropriate for kind of creating YouTube style videos where the person was just kind of sitting and talking to the camera. Very similar to what I'm doing now. It is currently the world's best selling camcorder, so I imagine that there's a fair number of people out there using it for that, as well, of course, those action videos and all kinds of fun stuff. Now, in the past, I've done tutorials cautioning people to be careful about the perspective, especially when photographing people, portraits. You want to really be careful about getting too wide because you can kind of increase the size of their head or make the size of their head look much larger than it actually is. So I wanted to kind of use this for a moment. Now, this obviously a GoPro is not a DSLR. We're working with a very different beast here, but it does have incredibly wide field of view. So to give you a reference right now, I'm shooting at the 2.7K, and you should be able to ask YouTube to show you the original format. I think it's going to go even above 1080p. Your monitor probably can't support that, but it'll be there for you. And at their wide setting in 24 frames a second. What I want to do in this video is just kind of run through some of the different frame rate options, sorry, not the frame rates, some of the different perspective options and resolutions available to us when we're using a GoPro, and see if it is appropriate or not for kind of your talking head style videos. Now, I still love this GoPro device. It's really nice for me for shooting kind of B camera roll. It's off to the side, showing my setups while I'm working. The Wi-Fi system really works nice. Battery life obviously could be better. I'll have more to say about the GoPro soon, and I need to show you the pile of accessories that I've already accumulated with it. But for now, let's just kind of run through. I'm recording audio on a separate device, but maybe right about now, I'll let you in on how the GoPro onboard audio sounds, so you can kind of get a comparison. I'm using the skeleton housing, which it has some holes. It's not waterproof, and should give you a little bit better audio quality. Overall, I found the audio quality on board to be decent. Again, this camera is tiny, and so it's really impressive. Whenever I get anything decent audio-wise out of it, I'm fairly happy. Now, so I said we're shooting at the 2.7K, 24 frames a second. Let's go down a little bit, so we're going to stop this, restart it at the next level down. All right, this is 1440 at 24 frames a second. I found this footage to be really nice, really clean. The aspect ratio is 4:3, same as photography. So if you were mixing the two up and creating some kind of slideshow, video slideshow, this might be a nice format to use. You can start to see that the mess down on the table were a little bit less wide and a little bit more tall now. We were shooting at 17:9, now we're shooting at 14:3. And for reference, the camera, the GoPro, is sitting about 2.5, maybe 3 feet from my head at eye level. So it's quite close, much closer than I think you probably all originally thought. Let's go down to our next option now. Here we are at our 1080 super wide view. Not much more to say about that, except we do have a super wide. Now, at this 1080 super wide, we do have different field of view options. So this is the wide, then we're going to run through. Here is our medium view on the 1080 super wide option, but now shooting at medium. And now here we are still at the 1080 super wide, but using the narrow field of view. And you can see that that is quite narrow, much, much more confined than our earlier wide or even the medium was. And I think proportions in this look fairly decent. I'm going to reserve final judgment until I get to see this all back on the computer in larger format, but still pretty decent. All right, now here we are at 720. We're actually bumped up to 60 frames a second at this, but you can see that we are quite wide, and we're going to have black bars around the screen now if you're viewing this at 1080, because we're going to be letterboxed because we're not as large as we were when we originally started. And then from here we just end up with a much smaller resolutions. I don't think we need to run through those. The field of view for most of those is still wide, so it's going to have a similar look. It's just going to be a lower resolution. I have to say that 1080 on the narrow looked quite good. Let's go back to that for just a second. So here we are back at the 1080. I've been shooting all of this at 24 frames per second, except for that last little bit lower resolution. You're forced to shoot at the higher frames rate. So that's good for action. I'm not going to talk about that at all today, but obviously if you're shooting high-speed action and you want to be able to slow it down, you should be shooting at those higher rates. But if you're doing a talking head video like this, 24 frames per second is that kind of nice cinematic frame rate. that looks pretty good. And I have to say, well, I went to look at my phone, but the preview doesn't run when you are actually recording. I have to say that I think this narrow looks fairly good. Again, reserving final judgment for seeing it back on the computer. Let's one more time, let's switch back over to the onboard audio and hear a little bit about how that sounds. So could this be the camera that you buy, $400, plump down and suddenly be a YouTube star? Well, certainly if you're doing action videos, absolutely it's all you need. But if you wanted to do kind of talking head stuff, I think it does a decent job. Audio should always be captured with something else to give you a little bit better, higher quality, and there's easy ways to do that. I'll talk about that soon with just a couple of extra devices, and maybe just $100 more will get you some nicer audio capture systems without adding a whole lot of clunkiness to the setup. Oh, one other thing to mention is that this is all in pretty good light, about 2.5 feet from the back of the GoPro are two wide windows. We have a bright overcast day, so we're getting good light, and I think in some of the field of view you could see a reflector that I have setting up on my left, camera right, that's bouncing a little bit more light back over to kind of even it out a little bit. So I have noticed in lower light the GoPro definitely starts to suffer, so you need good light when you're filming. But for ease of setup, you don't have to mess with focus, all of that stuff, it does a pretty nice job. So since I mentioned low light test, I thought I'd throw this in at the end of the video. It's nighttime. No outside light now. We got one overhead bulb is the only light in the room currently, and the GoPro's in a slightly different position, but you can get an idea. They're shooting at the 1080p, 24 frames per second at the medium setting, which I thought after looking at some of these samples back on the computer, that was kind of the best kind of compromise between quality and the lack of distortion there. Or for comparison's sake, this is what DSLR footage looks like. So this is currently shooting with the Nikon D5300, up around, I think it's ISO 2000, 2500, somewhere around that general neighborhood. So it'll be interesting to compare and contrast these two. The DSLR is obviously going to do much better, much bigger sensor. I am not shooting quite as wide as the lens will allow, so I could go even a little bit wider and get a lower ISO. But you know, we're not really, that's comparing apples and oranges here. A DSLR and a GoPro are not the same. But when we're talking about what's best for these talking head videos and kind of the most versatility, I think it is interesting to compare. And if we turn on some lights that I often use for video work, we can see that the GoPro instantly adjusts, and the Nikon was set on all manual settings except for audio, and so that's going to change greatly how that looks. Back to the regular video. So this was a look at the different field of view and resolutions from the GoPro 3 Plus edition. I'm using the black, but the other models offer many of these same resolutions and frame rates, if not all of them. Thanks so much for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe.